Hi, Adriana. Thank you so much for coming and agreeing to join our translation interview series.
Thank you for inviting me.
Can you please start by telling us about yourself? How did you become a translator? What drew you to translation?
Well, I've always really had a close contact with languages, and because my family throughout my entire life had traveled and lived in different countries, I became interested in translation when we got to Spain. And but there I did my BA in art history, and only when we came to Canada I actually decided to move into translation, and I studied here the certificate for English, Spanish, Spanish-English translation at London College at York University. And then I really thought that I wanted to explore more the theoretical side of translation studies, and I did the MA in translation studies also at London College.
How long have you been in the field?
Right now I have been working actively for about 5 years.
Okay. So what is your, I would say, native language or languages you usually work with?
Well, my original native language is Bosnian, but at the age of 6 I acquired Serbian and left Bosnian a little bit behind. And then at the age of 13 I acquired Spanish. And Spanish right now is the language I consider to be my strongest language, just because I did a big chunk of my high school and my university studies in that language.
Do you normally translate into English?
I usually don't translate into English. I translate into Spanish, Serbian and Bosnian. And I don't translate into English mainly because it's my fourth language. And it does take me a longer time to make sure everything is perfect in English, and I have to research much more. So I don't usually translate into English.
What fields of translation do you specialize in, or what do you enjoy most?
Well, what I enjoyed most is any healthcare-related documents. And I also really enjoy arts and humanities-related documents. And what I do also a lot here is community translation, and I enjoy that quite a bit, especially because community translation also entails a little bit of legal translation, and that's also a lot of fun as well.
What is the most important skill a modern translator should have, in your opinion?
Well, there are, of course, a plethora of skills a translator should have, but I think, for me at least, there are 4 majorly important skills that the translator should have. And the first of them is writing skills. The second is attention to detail, and that's my favorite one. Third one is probably cultural knowledge and willingness to learn every day something new. And the fourth one would be more related to nowadays, and that is knowing how to use computers, IDS, and CAT tools.
Mm-hmm. How do you keep up to date about new topics, tools, or sharpening your skills in all the languages you work with?
Well, on a day-to-day basis, I usually read newspapers, magazines, or books in the languages I work into and from. But if and when I have time, I also really like going to continuous education courses, trainings, workshops, because they always keep you up to date, especially in CAT tools and things like that.
Do you think creativity is important in the overall translation process?
I do think creativity is important in the overall translation process, and I've been thinking about this, and creativity is usually seen as this spontaneous process of having imaginative freedom and creating something new. But really, in translation studies, I think creativity doesn't have necessarily to add, remove, or alter any linguistic or semantic meaning. It can just be other things that we use in the translation process. So creativity, I think, is usually in the translation world related to literary translation and also to advertisement and marketing translation, where they usually call it transcreation, right? And of course, this is probably the field where they use all these word puns, humor, words that evoke images. They also use a lot of metaphors and stuff like that. And that is definitely very culturally embedded, and it has local and shared cultural knowledge, which is very difficult to translate and transfer. But I think that all other fields of translation also are creative, and that all translators use creativity in their work.
Thank you. What is creativity in translation for you personally?
Well,
how would you characterize it?
going back to what I just said about creativity in general, and especially specifically in translation, I would say that in translation, or some people call translation rewriting, and indeed it is rewriting something into a different language. So any process of writing needs some sort of creation or creativity levels. I also think that translation itself, by being a process that uses linguistic and cultural application, also needs some creativity to translate anything from one culture into another, by having to take into account two cultures or extra textual and textual things. Also, translation is always a process of decision. So we have many decisions or many options to choose from, and we are the ones responsible to choose the most adequate or appropriate one. It is also a problem-solving activity, and any problem-solving activity involves some creativity. And we also transfer not only linguistic, but also meaning in itself. So I think, for me, creativity in translation is just being able to use language resources that we have and translation strategies to be able to express the meaning from one language or from source text into a target text, not necessarily departing from this source text, which is something that you have to do for literary translation or marketing in order to adapt the message, but just using all the tools we have, such as explicitation, condensation, addition, omission, paraphrasing, adaptation. All of these are tools and strategies we use and that you have to use creatively.
As you know, we need to always think of a moderate use of something, or moderation. So in your opinion, what is the right amount of creation? Like, how much creativity is enough? So just where we have to say stop so that not to get carried away.
Yeah, of course. And we come back here to the centuries-old debate of free or literal translation. But really, I think there has to be a little limit depending on the text type or depending on the translation type you're doing. You do have to impose some limits to your creativity because your first and most important job is to do that translation closest possible to what the client needs. And I think the level of creativity employed for a certain translation type will definitely depend on the end user and the purpose of the translation. For any type of translation, usually literary translation does require a little bit more, but even a technical text that is usually considered to be the driest type of translation can entail some creativity because not everything has a natural equivalent. So we have to use some of the strategies I said before. Mm-hmm. And I would say that is also creativity. So in that sense, moderate levels of creativity depending on the purpose of the translation.
Okay. Can you think of any recent, maybe best remembered situation when you have to use all of your creativity to translate a text or even a phrase?
Well, I've been thinking about this as well, and I saw just yesterday a text in English, and I'm going to read a sentence, and it said, "If your child excels at the arts, make a big deal out of it." And this is a text that had a conversational tone, and it had to be translated the same way for parents. And in Spanish, and this is what I translated, I thought about it quite a bit, and nothing really clicked for me in the make a big deal of it section. And I thought hard about it, and I decided, instead of saying dale una gran importancia, which would be probably the most literal translation of this possibility, I decided to go with hágale saber que está orgulloso, which means make sure that your child knows that you're really proud of him or her. And I just did that after a while, after maybe 15 minutes of thinking about it, because I thought this was the only way to convey the same message and to have the same effect on the reader as this ST had intended. So I thought this was a little bit of creativity, probably not my all creativity, but hopefully. But it was a creative moment that I had yesterday, and I thought this is perfect for that.
Yeah, that's a great example, I think, to back what you said previously. I guess my last questions here. Sometimes when translators experience that whether the text they work on require too much creativity or less creativity, but sometimes we can get stuck on something, what are your strategies of coping with that?
Coping when you get stuck with
Yeah,
something?
so like what would you do? Even if it's mostly when it's creative. You have to think
The first thing I do is talk to friends, talk to other translators that I have worked with or that I'm friends from my certificate, for example. I talk to them and see if we can brainstorm something together, just for that little example, because the best thing I found is if you can share that idea and have a little chat or brainstorming session. Other options are just leaving the text and coming back to it after an hour, for example, or if you have time after a day even. Sometimes I also just read on the topic and see if there are some words or some elements that can spark some idea that can help me solve the problem. Those are my top 3.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you so much, Adriana, for your time, for your wonderful insights on the topic. All the best.
Thanks.